Delighted to be here, delighted you're here. Delighted to have the after lunch slot, actually. I think it's vastly underrated. I do, really, I do. So this is not, there is going to be at least a degree of interaction over the next 40 minutes or so. And in a few minutes' time, you'll need something to write on and with. So if you haven't got a pen and a bit of paper, you'll just maybe need to type into the notes on your phone or something. My absolute passion is the alignment of strategy, culture, and customer experience in organizations. And what I really want to do over the next 40 minutes or so is to give you a practical framework to take away into your organization, which will give you an advantage over at least 97% of your competition. And I can say that with real conviction because we have a set of very simple questions, 6 questions that I have asked hundreds and hundreds of leadership teams in organizations over the last 5 years. 6 questions that relate to strategy, culture, and customer experience. And in 97% of cases, in fact, it's closer to 99% of cases, those leaders at the very top of organizations give different answers to each other when they're talking about strategy, culture, and experience. And in that very small proportion that we've come across where there is alignment, not just throughout the organization, but even at the very top, across those 3 critical areas, then they're the people who break down silos really quickly, even if they exist. They're the people who are able to be really agile because it's on a foundation upon which everybody looks in the same direction. And it's easier to change course because everyone knows what the starting point is. And I'm not just going to share the 6 questions with you, I'm going to ask you them and get you to answer them for yourself. And then I'm going to give you some of my definitions. Just before we get into it, I'm just curious, who would consider themselves to be a business owner, director, founder? Okay, who would consider themselves to be a leader in the organization that they operate in? Cool. Okay, so those of you who are leaders, you can take these 6 questions and help make your organization even more aligned than it is. Those of you who don't consider yourselves to be leaders, who might be kind of technical experts, the really brilliant thing is you're probably going to have a better and clearer definition of things like strategy and culture than your bosses. Because the interesting thing is things like strategy, I'll talk about this in a little while, but everybody talks about strategy and pretends we know what we're talking about, but actually very few people in the room really do know, or at least very few people are talking about the same thing. Let me give you a couple of examples of organizations that have used this methodology. Some of them may look more agile and modern than others. Does anybody happen to know what that is? It's the whole of the Mary Rose. And if you are even vaguely into history, if you haven't been to see the Mary Rose, go and visit it. It's an incredible place. The Mary Rose Trust has the biggest collection of Tudor artifacts in the world. It's wonderful, and I'm lucky enough to know and coach the CEO who's kept that place alive. And I wrote a book on this stuff over the last year or so, came out in the summer. And one of the quotes he gave me for that was that using these 6 questions and the methodology that sits behind it, it's probably saved him 3 years worth of work developing strategy and culture, which I think anything that saves us that amount of time can be useful. Other organizations that use it, any ideas? Yeah, it's Legoland. So my longest standing clients, Milne Entertainments, who are second to Disney in their field. This methodology is in that business. To give you a flavour of where they're going, they've just announced a new strategy to grow from a 2 billion EBITDA business to a 6 billion EBITDA business in 6.5 years, which is fairly stretching for most people. And having been around the business a while, I'm fairly confident they're going to do it. This doesn't look quite as sexy, I know, but this is a primary school in one of the rough ends of Newcastle. There are many rough ends of Newcastle. But the head of this school is a longtime friend of mine and a coaching client as well. And before he headed to this particular school, he was the head of a very small primary school in the middle of nowhere in Northumberland. And he turned it from a school that was on the verge of going into special measures to being on the verge of being an outstanding school in about 2.5 years. And the reason I share that is like, this isn't just for big organizations or small organizations. This methodology has been used, at least in parts, in organizations like these, and Bally's and Netflix and Warner Brothers, and it's for you as well as all of those. Before we go any further, I'd like to dispel a couple of business myths that I hear a lot. One is that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Who's come across that or some derivative of some sort? Okay, so here's my thing with this. It's not true and it doesn't make any sense. And my real issue, though, is I think Peter Drucker was talking about things 50 years ago that are still relevant and maybe even almost thought-leading now. So again, when I was writing the book, I kind of thought I have to call this out, but I don't like insulting Peter Drucker because I've got a lot of respect for him. So I started researching the quote, and I found that the first time this quote was actually attributed to Peter Drucker was 2010. And unfortunately, Peter Drucker died in 2006. So Peter Drucker never even said this, ever. Now, of course, the real issue I've got with it isn't who said it, it's the fact that it doesn't make any sense. And the moment we start putting strategy and culture at odds with each other is the moment we start building silos in organizations. We make it harder for us to communicate in organizations. It makes it harder for us to get the results that we want and to change direction if we need to. The second myth, actually, in a room like this tends to be a bit more controversial with some people. Because if you're like me, you probably love Simon Sinek too. Who was a big fan of Simon Sinek stuff at some point? Okay, cool. So I want to say I still love a lot of what Simon Sinek did. I actually still love this model in certain applications. My challenge with Simon Sinek's work, in case you haven't come across it, is Simon Sinek is really well known for talking about starting with why. In fact, his book is Start With Why. And he talks about the fact, if you look at his original TED Talk, which is about 13, 14 years old now, seminal TED Talk, is that great organizations start with why. And one of the brilliant examples that he uses is Apple. He talks about that Apple was formed on this core belief that they want to challenge the status quo. We want to do things different. A lot of you probably know the Apple story better than I do. That's really not what Apple was formed on. Apple was formed on two guys in a garage who made really cool computer things. An investor come along and go, we can make loads of money from that, and them deciding to build a business out from that. That is a commercial decision. It's a strategic decision. The purpose stuff came much later. And again, what I'm not saying is that culture isn't important. It's not that I don't believe an organization should have a purpose, not at all. But that's not the starting point. Great organizations don't start with why, they start with what. Great organizations start with a strategic intent, and everything else aligns with that. I'll explain a little bit more about why I believe that in a little while. I'm going to ask you these 6 questions. I genuinely would like you to write down your answers for yourself, and then we'll kind of compare them. If you have here with a colleague from your own organization, you can compare your answers with each other. And if not, you can compare them with mine, see if you agree. And then you can take these questions back. If all you do from this session, if all you do from today is go in, make sure that your colleagues, the people in your organization, give the same answers as each other to these 6 questions, you'll have got real value. Again, if your answers to these questions are different to my answer to these questions, but they agree with the others in your organization, that's more important. You win. Alignment is what's important. So, question number 1, I'd like you to write down your definition of what is strategy. Jot it down. So imagine you've no doubt in your organization, no matter what level you're at, or no matter what your position is, there'll have been conversations about strategy and talk about strategy. When you think about strategy, if I said, what is strategy, what would you give me as your definition? Jot that down. Okay, question number 2, and of course I'm not going to get you to share this with anybody else unless you're here with a colleague, and you can do that by choice. But if you think about your business, either the area that you lead, or if you're senior enough, you know, the overall organization, if I was to ask you what is your key strategic objective, what is the ultimate deliverable that you're responsible for, you know, jot that down. And if there's somebody sat beside you don't know, you want to write down code, that's fine as well. But what is the overall key strategic objective, either for your business or for the area of the business that you're responsible for, that you lead? It's about this point, it's about question number 3, where people go, I didn't realize I was coming for a test. I didn't realize it was an exam. It'll be worth it, I promise. Number 3, what is your definition of culture? And I'm, of course, talking about organizational culture in this context. When people talk about culture in your organization, if they were to stop and say, hey, what's your definition? What is that? What's your definition of organizational culture? Okay, number 4, slightly different kind of question. The scale is 1 to 6, 1 is low, 6 is high. On a scale of 1 to 6, to what degree does the current culture in your organization or in your team support the delivery of the strategic objective? So on a scale of 1 to 6, where 1's low, 6 is high, to what degree does your current culture support the delivery of your answer to number 2? Okay, and number 5, what is the distinction for you between service and experience? So I'm talking about customer service, customer experience, client service, client experience, guest service, guest experience. What is the distinction for you between customer service, customer experience, whatever type of customer end user purchaser you've got? Now, I know there's an assumption there that there is a distinction between service and experience. If for some reason you believe there's not, that's fine, you can jot that down. But most people agree that there is a distinction between service and experience. If there is, what is that distinction?
Do you mean the service you provide and the experience they get? I'm losing, sorry.
Yes, that's probably close to an answer, yeah. Okay, and the last question, what is your X? In other words, what is the experience that you want your customers, clients, guests, visitors to have? So if I was one of your customers, my organization is one of your clients, what is the experience that you would want or expect me to have? And by the way, inherent in your answer, I would expect there to be some degree, at least some signpost of what I would get if being a customer or client of yours versus a customer or client of your competition. But that aside, what is the experience that you want for your customers, clients, visitors, guests? Okay, I'm going to share my answers, my definitions, and some examples. And if you are here, if you're sat next to one of your colleagues now, I'd love you to compare each other's. Now again, you don't have to agree with my answers, But what I do want, again, is for you to be clear on what your distinctions and definitions are and make sure that everybody else who leads your organization is as well. So, I've been on a journey with strategy for a long time. So for years, we used to turn down work that was to do with strategic leadership. People come and say, would you do some strategic leadership? And I would go, we don't do strategic leadership, we do transformational leadership, we do inspiring leadership. And the truth of it was, I thought that everybody else knew what strategy was, and I was the idiot in the room that didn't. And a client backed me into a corner, and eventually I had to go and learn about strategy. So I did a kind of 6-8 month study project, partly read a ton of books, finished a couple. I remember going to one of the kind of top London business schools and doing a strategic leadership for entrepreneurs program. Came out of that really no clear on what strategy was. I could do a mint SWOT analysis, but I didn't really know where it fitted into anything else. But eventually, with all of this input, I came to a conclusion in a definition of strategy, which I'm going to say now is not very sexy. But I think it's really relevant in helping people to get clear on what strategy is, and vitally on what strategy isn't. So here's my unsexy definition. Strategy is the overall key strategic objective of the organization, and the rich, multifaceted sub-strategies that are created all the way down to the actions and tactics that, when activated, collect together to deliver the overall key strategic objective. I'll say it one more time because it trips off the tongue. The overall key strategic objective and the rich, multifaceted sub-strategies all the way down to the tactics and actions that, when activated, collect together to deliver the overall key strategic objective. One of the very few strategy books I managed to do from start to finish was a book called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy by Richard Rummelt. And in there's lots of nods. It is definitely one of the better ones. And in there was a phrase that took me in. It was that strategy is only strategy when all elements are present. So, for example, a key strategic objective is vital in the strategic process, obviously, but it isn't a strategy in and of itself. And lots of organizations will say, our strategy is to become a 6 billion EBITDA business by 31st December 2030. It's a cool pursuit and it's a cool strategic objective, but it's not a strategy. Other organizations will have some big, hairy, audacious goal and then just 500 million actions that everybody's running around trying to achieve and deliver. A good action plan is a good action plan, but it's not a strategy. Because what a good action plan doesn't do is break down that overall key strategic objective into a number of what we call enabling objectives, sub-objectives. And, the strategic process for me is largely a systematic breaking down of whatever the objective is above, until we get to the point where we're into the actions and tactics. The other thing that definitely isn't a strategy is vision. Now, I'm a huge fan of vision, but it's nothing to do with strategy. By nature, a vision shouldn't be smart. A vision shouldn't really be achievable as such. I always believe that vision should be just outreach. We should feel like, I really want to get there, but I'm not quite sure how we're going to. It should be inspiring and engaging and should get people out of bed in the pursuit of it. But it's not the strategy. Strategies don't have to be inspiring, but they do have to be smart. We stopped working with a client recently because they were they wanted us to help their kind of exec -1 people to deliver the strategy because they still couldn't get their head around the strategy and they didn't know why they were off doing all these things. And when we eventually got our hands on the strategic document, there was a whole number of what I would call sub-strategies, like departmental functional strategies that all stood alone and fed into a vision. It was impossible to deliver that strategy because they were trying to deliver to something that wasn't measurable. So what I tend to find, if any of you are sitting thinking, God, this really resonates, like maybe we aren't as clear a strategy as I thought, or that's not what we've got. What tends to be useful is for a period of time, the only thing that you call a strategy is the whole thing. And we don't use the word strategy for anything else. Strategy is the overall key strategic objectives, rich, multifaceted sub-strategies, that when they add together, collectively, they deliver the overall key strategic objective. So I'm not going to go, hey, how many millions is your company going to do? And, how many, I'm not going to go around and get everyone to share their key strategic objective. But the vital thing for me is, if what you have written down in answer to question number 2, if what you have written down there isn't absolutely smart, then it's not a strategic objective. Now, I am certain that this isn't the case in this room, but I did similar talk this a little while ago, and eventually at the end, somebody put their hand and went, what do you mean by smart? I'm sure you all know, but just in case, I'm talking specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. If what you wrote down in the answer to question number 2 isn't smart, it's not a strategic objective. For a strategic objective to be strategic objective, it has to be smart, regardless of what team, department, function you lead. And that can be challenging for some departments, functions, and organizations, more challenging than others. The most difficult one I've ever worked with anyone on was a cyber security strategic objective, because the whole point of cybersecurity is to stop things happening. But we got there in the end. They have to be, if it's not smart, it's not a strategic objective. Should we do it? Let me do it this way around. Whose answer to number 2 is beautifully smart? Okay, well done, the one person who put their hand up. It's transformational. And like I say, I am a culture guy, not a strategy guy. I got press ganged into strategy. It's been transformational for my organization, not just the people I work with. Okay, culture. I reckon if I say something now that is similar to what you've got written down, just pop your hand up so I know we're on the right track. Some of you will have written down that something like, culture is how we behave in our organization. Those behaviors. Okay, culture is how we act with each other. Culture is how it feels to work in the organization. Anyone got, like, culture is what we make important? Okay, so I think culture is all of those things. I believe culture is absolutely how it feels to work around here. I think culture is how we show up for everybody every day, like how we are when we walk in the room. I believe culture is what we demonstrate is important by our actions. I believe culture is what we allow by our actions. I also, and this is the thing that's often missed in culture, I believe that culture is how we go about doing the work. Our culture seeps out through the work that we do. Part of our culture change program, culture change process that we use is that people go away and test, does this culture show up in every policy, process and procedure that we have in the organization? Because if it doesn't, the culture won't last. And if it does, the culture will thrive and take on its own life. So my favorite definition of culture is that culture is how we be around here. And I know that's not very good English. It's not just because I'm from up north. For me, that's an encompassing of all of those other things. Culture isn't any one of those definitions. It's all of it together. At this stage, if you were all one team in one organization, I might say, okay, who's got a 3, who's got a 4, who's got a 5, who's got a 6? I'm not going to do that to you. But if you give in a score of anything less than a 4 for this question of, on a scale of 1 to 4, to what degree does your current culture support the delivery of your strategic objectives? If it's anything less than 4, you need to do some work on culture, whether it's the culture of your team or whether it's the culture of your organization. I'm going to say this again in a moment really clearly, but if your culture isn't supporting the delivery of your strategic objectives, it's blocking the delivery of your strategic objectives. Culture is either a strategic enabler or a strategic blocker. If you're, 4, 5, 6, golden, with a little kicker. You can't answer that really clearly unless you've got a really crystal clear, smart objective in your answer to number 2. You can't be sure that your culture's right unless you're really clear on what your strategy is. We worked for, we did some work for a big, again, multi-billion-pound tech company. We had the top 21 people from the biggest part of their organization. We asked them these questions, and they got to this and they were smug. There was one person out of the 21 gave it a 4, and everyone else was 5s and 6s. It was like, this is a great place to work. When we went back and checked the answers to number 2, out of 21 people in the room, there were 20 different answers as to what the key strategic objective was they were looking to deliver. What it meant was it was a lovely place to work. They all got on dead well. But it was a light bulb for them, because what they realized was it was probably a bit too nice. And a lot of the grief they got from their internal customer was possibly because they weren't challenging enough with each other. Distinction between service and experience. I think there is. If anyone doesn't, that's cool. But I think absolutely there is. And I think the most straightforward distinction is that service is what we give and experience is what they have. Whether you've got customers, clients, guests, visitors, however you define the people who buy your thing. Service is what you give, experience is what they have. Now, I often try and think of an organization that should only be a service organization, and I struggle with it a little bit. I settled on petrol stations for quite a long time. I don't mind that just being really transactional, and thought, yeah, but I don't want to stand in a queue for too long. I want it to be easy. And ease is one of the key drivers of loyalty, as I'm sure you know. So even that, I want an experience of sorts. But for me, as I say, the key distinction between service and experience is service is what we give and experience is what they have. Which means that if you profess to be an experience business, you don't own the experience. If I'm a customer of yours, the experience lives in me. It's not yours. All you can do is everything that you possibly can to engender the experience that you want. Which is why lots of organizations will talk about customer experience, but they don't actually do it. What they do is service. Because service is much easier to measure. And here's one of the other curveballs. I spent a lot of my formative years in contact centers, and this was absolutely true. We think that by doing more service, the experience gets better. Often by doing more servicey stuff, the experience gets worse. Not always, but they're just not the same thing. They're not different parts on the same scale. Is anyone from a contact center kind of background or environment? Who's used a contact center? Who's ever rang a contact center before? You all know. Like, the best example I can give more straightforward is if you've ever rang a contact center, not had your query answered, and then at the end they say, is there anything else I can help you with? That's them doing service but making the experience worse. Because I want to go, no, there's nothing else you can help me with. You could just help me with the thing I rang for in the first place. But they're doing their job because they're ticking that next thing off on the service block. So don't confuse service and experience as being different points on the same journey. They are fundamentally different things. They are measured very differently. Most people measure experience by NPS. What NPS is brilliant for is benchmarking. But other than benchmarking, NPS doesn't tell you an awful lot else. NPS isn't a measure of loyalty or wallet share or anything like that. Whatever you've written as your answer for number 6, if you think you're in an experience business, go back and check it with your colleagues. It is out of them. If I take out number 4, because it's almost a trick question, almost none of the organizations we work in most of organizations are leisure, hospitality, they're very customer-facing businesses, very experienced businesses. And even in most of those, we get people like you in a room from those organizations and they don't give the same answer to number 6. If we don't know what we're shooting for in terms of the experience, there's no chance that the people on the front line are going to deliver it. If it happens by chance, and we absolutely can't be measuring it. If all you do from this is to go in, get your senior teams to give the same answers as each other to those 6 questions, you will notice huge changes in your organizations, and you'll be at a competitive advantage over 95, 97, 99% of your competition. I want to make some really clear, explicit links, because the alignment of those 6 questions is only part of it. I've alluded to a couple of others. Strategy and culture are almost never talked about in the same conversation. And when they are, as we saw in those 2 myths at the beginning, they're set at odds with each other. We're either like a commercial, strategic organization and the people stuff's a kind of poor second, or we are a purpose-driven organization and almost the money bit becomes a slightly dirty word. These have to be happy bedfellows. If your culture has to be shaped to be a strategic enabler. If it's not a strategic enabler, it's a strategic blocker. If your culture isn't supporting the delivery of your strategy, it's getting in the way of your delivery of your strategy. I'll give you 2 really simple examples. One's Milne, who I mentioned earlier on. If you're going to treble in size in 6.5 years, no matter how big or small the numbers are, you need a certain kind of culture to drive that on. If you're going into new markets, you're going to invent new things. And, you know, if you're going 2 billion, 6 billion, you need a certain kind of culture. I've spent 2 days this week with a building society. Has anyone ever worked in a building society? Oh, brilliant. You'll know they're not quite like the church, but they're fairly austere organizations. My first job was in a building society as a 16-year-old. I love the sector. But it's not a huge growth sector. As it happens, this particular organization's got a bit of a growth ambition, but they're not looking to double, treble, quadruple in size. They're looking to stay safe and steady and protect their members. That requires a different culture. Your culture has to be shaped to be a strategic enabler. If it's not a strategic enabler, it's a strategic blocker. And none of these are more important. There's just a bit of an order. However, culture is the pivot, because the kicker in here is your customer experience cannot outperform your employee experience for any prolonged period of time. I'll say that again. Your customer experience can't outperform your employee experience for any prolonged period of time. Your culture seeps out into the customer, and you know this because you feel there's a customer all the time. Therefore, not only does your culture have to be shaped to be a strategic enabler, your culture has to be shaped to be an enabler of the experience that you want to create as well. Which is why it's vital to go back and get alignment on that last question, question number 6, what is the experience we're looking to create? Because if we don't know what that is, we don't really know what the culture is we're looking to create. And the moment you and your organization get fully aligned across those 3 things, it's a different game altogether. Those kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Unicorn organizations, many of them, they just do this brilliantly, brilliantly well, aligning these 3 areas. And I've got a slightly less sexy than usual example of one of these organizations. Before I give you this, I'd love any questions on anything that we've touched on over the course of the last kind of 30 odd minutes. If you had any questions, what would they be? Yes, please.
How scared are senior leaders when you walk into their room for the first time?
That's a brilliant question. Okay, I'm going to give a couple of honest answers, and then I would love to know why you're asking. So one is not like the way we work. They know how we work. We partner, like this is going to, it's not a sales pitch by a long, like they know that we've understood what sits under their business already. Like we've partnered with them. On the one hand, there aren't any surprises. And I'm not stood here going, because none of you know this, you're in the wrong. I'm saying nobody knows this, nobody does it. Go and get the advantage. The flip side is the vast majority of people we work with think they've got this cracked. And it's only when I get the group of leaders together and ask those questions and then show them each other the answers. We worked for a business which was 100 million. The key strategic objective was to go from 100 million to 300 million in 3 years. There were 7 people in the senior team, including the CEO, who was the founder. And they wanted some stuff on culture. And I was like, well, you just let me ask all of the questions, not just the culture ones. And they're like, yeah, but fine. But everyone knows 100 million, 300 million, 3 years. And we got to ask the questions. And 7 people on the senior team, 6 different answers to that key strategic objective question. So they're not scared. The realization. I'd love to know why you asked the question.
So the reason we're probably about 3 months into a proper transformation journey, a new senior leadership team, and I'm pretty sure we'd all answer those questions differently right now.
Yeah.
So that's quite frightening.
Yeah, it is.
But we need to be open to that, because otherwise we're not going to get there. I guess is my point.
Yeah, no, it's a really good one. Honestly, my experience broadly, unless you've got somebody who is kind of a real command and control a control freak at the helm, just asking the 6th question and seeing that you have different answers is transformative in itself. It's much easier. One of the reasons the 6 questions developed was because I was a bit frightened to go in and say, you say what you know what your strategy is, but guess what, you don't. I'm not that kind of person. But asking the 6th question, because you'll find the things you are aligned on, and then where to focus. People sometimes say, where do you start with that? Well, you start where the answers to the 6 questions tell you to start. So, yes, please.
In the example you gave for the key strategic objective being something like growth and revenue, or something like that, can you give some examples of cultural things that would support something like a revenue increase, a strategic objective? Like what part of the culture would you say is a good example of something that would tie into?
Yeah. I'm going to try not to dodge the question, right? This is the first thing I'm going to say. If I look at it purely from an HR point of view, for example, because I've been a trainer all my life, so it's the department I identify most with. If we're looking at an HR key strategic objective, then if we think there's a critical part of it, like getting engagement to a certain level, one of the clients we work with, if we're confident enough in our staff survey scores that if we get those staff survey scores to a certain level, that will take care of the culture. And I don't argue with that if that's what they think. The flip side of that is I worked with an HR director who really wanted to establish HR as a business partner and a credible part of the business. And it was, but the bosses didn't see it like that. And so what we did was we just worked on a commercial objective even for HR. So she came up with this brilliant thing that was a key strategic objective, essentially was, I'll return 120% of the budget you give us, whatever that is. And she was confident enough, because staff turnover was huge in that organisation, attrition was massive. She was like, I'm not worried about the delivery of it, but what changed everything was all of a sudden there was a commercial number in front of them. So sometimes it's about changing the cultural stuff into a deliverable, which isn't always easy, but it can be really valuable. Let me share this really quickly and then I'm going to close. Sports Direct is not the sexiest example of this. It's much easier to do. Apple's, Nike, Amazon. Amazon are an amazing example of an aligned organisation. But if you look at Sports Direct, who's ever shopped in Sports Direct ever? Be honest. Thank you. I don't know what their actual strategy is, but if we were to guess at what their strategic raison d'etre is, what would you say?
Anything goes.
Yeah, exactly. Stack it high, sell it cheap. Everyone pretty much knows. If we talk about the culture of Sports Direct, we'd all probably say similar things. Has anyone ever worked there? I did it once, and there was an HR director in who used to work at Sports Direct. I was like, what was it like? She went, I lasted 2 weeks. Taken up in front of the select committee and the government, all of those kind of things. We probably wouldn't want our family working there for any prolonged period of time. If we go to Sports Direct, we know what experience we're likely to have. Really frenetic, young people with dirty orange polos doing their very, very best, running around to find our stuff, and then we go and stand, not in a big queue, but a small queue that goes very slowly, and then in the end, we also get sold a mug for £5. Right? Yet, I choose Sports Direct even over Amazon when it comes to buying, football boots, shin pads, those, gum shields, those kind of things for my kids. The reason Sports Direct is the high street success story for the last couple of decades. And I believe that one of the reasons behind that, a key reason behind that, is it's just a beautifully aligned organisation. Your culture doesn't have to be brilliant, it's just got to be aligned with the strategic intent and the experience that you want to give. I hope that's been incredibly valuable. If you do one thing, get the same answers to each other in your senior team as those 6 questions I shared earlier on. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.